leading us this morning. We're going to go back to the series that we started a few weeks ago, where we were looking at how we are made to mirror. God has made us in such a way that He wants us to reflect Him to all of society. Do you remember? It was a long time ago, wasn't it? Do you remember what we did in the first week? Anyone? We looked at Elijah. Does that help? And we looked at generosity. Remember how Jesus teaches us that when you look with a good eye or an evil eye, they're very different. When you look at someone with a good eye, you're being generous to that person, not looking at their faults. You're being generous. You're looking at their good points. You're edifying, building them up, but also financially looking generously at people as well. In the second one that we did, do you remember Peter, James, and John went up the mountain with Jesus? Do you remember? And that was talking about community. The small group that Peter, James, and John had, but also on top of that, then all the larger groups and the larger meetings, such as we are having here, that's community. And then that led us into looking at Ephesians the third week. And do you remember we looked at the orchestra and how the orchestra needed to be together? The violinists, the celloists, all the rest of the instruments all need to be working together to make the sound right. And so we, if you like, as an orchestra, as a holy orchestra, need to be using the gifts that we have so that the church will be powerful, not limping along because some people aren't using their gifts. Everybody needs to use their gifts, but everybody needs to use their gifts together. Not one person over there using their gifts and somebody over, everybody using them together so that we can move forward in power. You're not looking as if you remember that. We're moving on. Okay. That was servanthood, looking at the unity side of things. Today I want to look at a really popular, enthusiastic, joyful topic of perseverance. I'm sure you're perhaps already thinking, oh no. But perseverance is something we really need to take account of. It's interesting that the scripture that John read to you earlier, I mean, he didn't know what I was going to speak on today, but didn't it talk about the saints persevering in the book of Hebrews? Because in the first century, when that book was actually written, many of the believers of Jesus, had been dispersed all over the then known world, some of them languishing in jails, some of them being thrown to dogs, some of them being killed. And so the writer's trying to encourage them, persevere through this because your reward is worth it. And it's a replication of Jesus' life. He persevered because it was worth what he was giving up. We're supposed to mirror Jesus to the world. So perseverance is something we need to look at. What I want to do is look into the book of Nehemiah for this, to do a little bit. So if you get the book of Nehemiah open there, we're going to look at chapter 4. But I'll give you a little bit of background, first of all, with regard to that. Anybody here, their favorite book of the whole Bible, Nehemiah? Oh, we've got one, sort of. Yeah, Nehemiah is such a good book. I mean, I love all the Old Testament because there's so much wealth in it, but Nehemiah is a really good book. I'm not sure what you know about the background of Nehemiah, what you know about the content, so I'm going to give you a very whistle-stop tour, okay? A little bit of biblical history to find the context for where we find Nehemiah, okay? Because it's good to get the background in it so you know, well, why did Nehemiah do this? Why were the people doing this? Why? So the reasons for that hopefully will become clear. So there you go. Let's start off with this biblical historical timeline. The people of God, had come to the end. The kings had been bad. The northern 10 tribes had been scattered by the Assyrians all over the place. And all that was left was the 2 tribes in Judah around Jerusalem. That's the biblical timeline for this. And then Babylon is the major force. And they come in with King Nebuchadnezzar. Do you remember from the book of Daniel? Hopefully you'll find how these things all fit together. Nebuchadnezzar comes in, and attacks Jerusalem. And many of the people are killed, and many of them are taken away to Babylon, modern day Iraq for us, okay? Including Daniel. That's how the whole book of Daniel starts to become a bit more relevant. He's taken to Babylon. Many of the nobles, the rich people, those who were wealthy in society, they were taken to Babylon as well. You see, what the king wanted to do, Nebuchadnezzar, is he wanted to leave behind the poor people, those who had no ability, no money, and probably would just be demoralized and die. That's the thinking behind Nebuchadnezzar. It's attacked 3 times, okay, because King Zedekiah, who was there, he sort of raised up a bit of an army again, and they said, no, we're going to fight the Babylons. And Babylonians came and killed them, and then they came back a third. And on the third time, the temple was desolate, the walls were knocked down, the city was destroyed. Okay, so if you've got that in your heads, Jerusalem then after that is destroyed. They were in exile in Babylon for 70 years. And then Nebuchadnezzar is killed. And the Persian Empire, they rise up. Are you still with me? The Persian Empire, they rise up, okay, and they take over the Babylonians. And it's a historical figure called Cyrus, who's the king of Persia. Okay, he features in the scriptures, so that's why I'm mentioning his name. He then takes over, and he is the ruler. And Cyrus at that stage gets all of the people, okay, and that was in Babylon and places like that, and he says to them something differently than the Babylonians did. He says to them, people of God, Hebrews, if you want to go back and worship your God in the land that God gave you, i.e. Jerusalem, you can. And he gives them freedom just to go back. And so there is a group of them that go back. There's 3 waves of return, big waves of return, where huge numbers of the people all go back. Many remain in Susa. These are just the kings, just to put a couple into your head. I've already mentioned Cyrus. Xerxes the first, also called Ahasuerus. Anybody know where he features in the Bible? Nobody? Okay, if you read, yes? Brilliant. Esther. Yep. John is officially GCF Theologian of 2026. Yeah, in the book of Esther, you'll find that's who Esther marries. Okay? Esther marries King Xerxes. Or King Xerxes marries Esther is maybe a better way of putting it. And then the third one, Artaxerxes the first. Artaxerxes the first is important because he's in charge whenever Nehemiah comes. All right? Are you already confused, or are you still okay with me? Still okay? To a certain extent. Those are 4 of the prophets that you'll find were in around this time, which is approximately 500 BC. Okay, it'd be too complicated to start going into the exact dates, but approximately 500 BC is when these prophets were operating. And then the final thing, as we come on to Nehemiah, is the individuals that you'll find in the scriptures. Zerubbabel is important because he is one of the first that leads a group out of Persia, back to Jerusalem, and he starts to rebuild the temple. That's why he's important, okay? Esther, I've already mentioned. Ezra is a priest. He leaves exile, and he goes back in order to resurrect the worship of Jehovah God in the temple in Jerusalem, because Zerubbabel has built it. And then Nehemiah, we're going to find out, he's important because he comes back to build the walls of Jerusalem. All right, so Zerubbabel helps to build the temple. Ezra tries to put the worship back in place. And then Nehemiah comes along in order to build the city walls. So perseverance is what I want to look at. Let's look to Nehemiah chapter 4. Nehemiah chapter 4 as we begin this talk. Actually, just go to Nehemiah chapter 1. I want to show you what sort of man Nehemiah was. Nehemiah chapter 1. We're going to read from verse 5 onwards. This is a prayer that Nehemiah utters. Now, wait to hear how Nehemiah prays. Nehemiah at this stage, by the way, is a waiter. He serves the wine to King Artaxerxes, okay? So all the kings at that stage would have been fearful that they were going to be poisoned. So they employed a wine taster, someone that would taste their wine before the king chose to taste the wine. Anybody here fancy doing that job? It was actually really well paid. So he would have been on a very good salary, Nehemiah. But he risked death every time he put a cup to his lips. So Nehemiah isn't this big holy priest or anything like. Nehemiah is basically a servant, a waiter. And the thing I love about that is how God uses a waiter, a wine taster, to do massive things. Because I think we often think, because of what we see on television and what we hear out in society, that it's only the big movers and shakers that, God uses. No, I don't find that in the scriptures. I find God uses everybody. And everybody has a place to be used by God if you're willing. If you're not willing, then that's unfortunately a choice you've made. But if you're willing, as Nehemiah was, then you can be used. So Nehemiah is the waiter for King Artaxerxes. And here's how he prays. We'll start at verse 4 of chapter 1. When I heard these things, and he's hearing words of what's coming from Jerusalem, I sat down and wept. For some days I mourned and fasted and prayed before the God of heaven. And then I said, and listen to his prayer, O God Jehovah, God of heaven, the great and awesome God who keeps his covenant of love with those who love him and obey his commandments. Let your ear be attentive and your eyes open to hear the prayer your servant is praying before you day and night for your servants, the people of Israel. I confess the sins we Israelites, including myself and my father's house, have committed against you. We have acted very wickedly toward you. We have not obeyed the commands, decrees, and laws that you gave your servant Moses. Remember the instruction you gave to servant Moses, saying, if you're faithful, I will scatter you. If you're unfaithful, I will scatter you among the nations. But if you return to me and obey my commands, then even in your exiled people or at the farthest horizon, I will gather them from there and bring them to the place I have chosen as a dwelling for my name. We'll just finish there. I just wanted to set the context there. Nehemiah hears of the trouble that's going on in Jerusalem. Even though Zerubbabel has built the temple, even though Ezra has instituted the worship of God back again, still the walls are demolished. The city remains unprotected, and he weeps, and then he prays to God. What an awesome prayer. That's an awesome prayer that he offers up to God. Do you see how he confesses? Do you see how he's open? Do you see how he declares, God, you promised this. Please, in your mercy and your grace, use us to fulfill those promises. And Artaxerxes actually says, okay, Nehemiah, if that's what you want, here's some of my army. Here are all the building needs that you'll have, wood and stuff. Take them and go and rebuild Jerusalem. And so Nehemiah does that. When Nehemiah comes to Jerusalem, as with most things, when God's in it, the enemy wants to attack. And so there are people, and we'll come across them in a second, there who ridicule Nehemiah, who make fun of him, who start to make threats and all sorts of things towards Nehemiah to try and put him off. It's the enemy. It's the enemy. Because you'll hopefully remember we did a series a while back about how words have power. Well, the words of these enemies had power, and we'll discover a little bit more about that as we go on here. I just put up there some of the things that he was facing with regard to threats and ridicule and such like, to give you an idea of the context that we start reading in chapter 4. So let's read here in chapter 4. We're just going to read the first 3 verses to begin with, and we'll read perhaps half of the chapter. You still with me? Yeah? Do we need to open the windows? Do you need to stand up? And you're okay? chapter 4, verse 1. If you're going to come across some names here, just try and remember them and I'll explain who they are. When Sanballat heard that we were rebuilding the wall, he became angry and was greatly incensed. He ridiculed the Jews, and in the presence of his associates and the army of Samaria, he said, "What are those feeble Jews doing? Will they restore the wall? Will they offer sacrifices? Will they finish in a day? Can they bring the stones back to life from those heaps of rubble, burned as they are?" Tobiah the Ammonite, who was at his side, said, "What are they building? If even a fox climbed up on top of it, he would break down the walls of stone." Let's just finish there for the time being. So these characters have come in, Sanballat and Tobiah, and there's another guy called Geshem. They appear in chapter 2. You don't need to go back to that. I'll just tell you who they are. So Sanballat, okay, was a leader for the province of Samaria, which was north of Jerusalem. UK, geography-wise, you sort of got that in your head? So north, okay, was coming down towards where Nehemiah was to attack and threaten them. And then this guy, Tobiah, okay, he was on the eastern side, where modern-day Jordan is, if you like. So he was attacking from the east side. And then Geshem, who's not mentioned there, he's mentioned in chapter 2, he is a Saudi, so he's in Saudi Arabia, which is south of Jerusalem. So at this stage, Nehemiah and his people are surrounded on three sides, the north, the east, and the south, okay? And there are threats being made to them. But Nehemiah knew that, which is why I've entitled that "Opposition is Inevitable." Nehemiah knew that when he was coming back to do the work of God, that there would be opposition. And he comes back to Jerusalem and finds opposition. Exactly as he thought. Now, was he totally prepared for it? Probably not. But he deals with it very, very wisely and discerningly. And that's what we find here. Look at the opposition. It says, when Sanballat heard that they were rebuilding the wall, he became angry and greatly incensed. And it says that he had an army. So it's not just one man, okay, who is shouting threats. This is an army that has the potential to wipe out Nehemiah and the workers who were in Jerusalem and just obliterate them. So there must have been tremendous fear coming up in their particular lives. There's mockery then comes as well. Then whenever Tobiah comes in, look in verse 3. What are they building? If even a fox climbed, he would break down the wall of stones. You see what he's saying? He's mocking them and saying, you can't even build a wall because just if a little animal got up on top of it, it would suddenly fall down. Now, these are the big stones of a city that was being protected. That's the mockery. He's saying a little tiny animal would break those down. He's mocking them. And I think that we can get a lesson from this. Anybody here been mocked because of their faith? I know a man here who was physically assaulted because of his faith. Ridicule. We can have mockery because the enemy wants to discourage us. The enemy wants to throw threats because words have power. And this is what the scriptures, I think, are teaching us here. The power of words and how we need to be careful and be careful what we listen to and who we listen to. So you've got these three characters that are there. But Nehemiah knows about the opposition. He's aware of it. And I want you to see throughout this Nehemiah's perseverance, even with all that's going on. And that can be a reflection for us, hopefully, to persevere as well in our faith. Prayer is crucial. We've already looked at the one prayer that Nehemiah has at the chapter 1. Let's look in chapter 4 again about his prayer life. Chapter 4, verse 4, we're going from. Here's what Nehemiah says. Hear us, O our God, for we are despised. Turn their insults back on their own heads. Give them over as a plunder in the land of captivity. Do not cover up their guilt or blot out their sins from your sight, for they have thrown insults in the face of the builders. So we rebuilt the wall till all of it reached half its height, for the people worked with all their hearts. But then Sanballat, Tobiah, the Arabs, the Ammonites, and the men of Ashdod heard that the repairs to Jerusalem's walls had gone ahead and that the gaps were being closed. They were very angry. They all plotted together to come and fight against Jerusalem and stir up trouble against it. But, notice verse 9, we fought back with knives and guns, and it doesn't say that, does it? But we prayed. But we prayed to our God and posted a guard day and night to meet the threat. Do you see how Nehemiah reacts? Now, lots of us, because we're human, would be forgiven for perhaps wanting to seek revenge. Perhaps anger within us because of insults and threats, and we might want to get retribution. But Nehemiah displays here, and the people, perfectly how we should react whenever we're faced with these sorts of insults and things. Nehemiah firstly prays, and then the people pray. Now, do you see how honest Nehemiah's prayer is? He doesn't make it all wishy-washy. Sometimes we don't like to actually face reality. Sometimes we maybe cloak a few things even in our prayers. But I sense here what God's teaching us is that we need to be very realistic and honest in our prayers to God, especially if we're angry. Anger's not necessarily a time not to pray. Quite often it can be a time to pray to God. He's a big God. And we need to be careful, obviously, what we say to him, but God knows that we're humans. And here he's hearing Nehemiah's heart. Oh, God, blot out their... he's almost saying, wipe them out, God. Does God wipe them out? No, he doesn't. But he does answer Nehemiah's prayer. Not maybe the way Nehemiah prays it here. And that so often, I think, will happen to us. Maybe you've experienced that yourself, that you've prayed a certain thing, but God's answered it in a slightly different way. Or maybe God hasn't answered it yet, and you're still waiting to hear from God. That's not that he's forgotten. His timing's perfect. And he will answer it at the right time. But we need to focus here on what Nehemiah is saying. He's real and honest with God. He's saying, God, these guys, we might say, are doing my head in. They're really getting into me. So he's honest with God. And God responds with mercy, grace, love. But he knows Nehemiah's heart is true. But he knows that the words are coming out are frustration and our anger. And that's the other thing about his prayer. He gets it out. We, I think, as humans can be very, very easy to hold on to the anger. Because we think, oh no, you shouldn't do that. I know you shouldn't be angry or aggressive, or that's not the way it is. But you do need to probably get it out at some stage, and Nehemiah has got it out with his prayer to God. And if you don't get that anger out, what happens? Do you remember Cain and Abel in the book of Genesis? Cain kills Abel. Why does he kill him? Because God accepted Abel's sacrifice, but rejected Cain's. And so Cain was jealous. And the jealousy didn't come out. He didn't get it out. So the jealousy inside him became anger, resentment. And the anger and resentment turned into lust for murder. And he killed his own brother. His own brother. See what anger does? If we don't somehow release it in a discerning way. I'm not saying that you release your anger with fists, and we need to be discerning and wise. But Nehemiah shows you we do need to get it out somehow. And if you're being honest with God, then that's okay according to what we see here in this particular part. He's really honest. He's really passionate in what he says as well. He says, do not blot out their sins, for they've thrown insults. So he's really honest with God about what he does. And then look at verse 6. Then after he prays, we rebuilt the wall till all of it reached half of its height. So the people had worked in the background really diligently and built the wall up to half. Okay, now again, we need to get this into its context. This is the huge defensive walls of a city. It's not a little wall out somebody's garden. Okay, this is a huge job. And the people worked diligently in the background and built it up to half. And because the enemies saw that God was blessing their work and their labors, they became angry. And then more threats, and then more intimidation, and then more harsh work. And so it grew and grew and grew. And that's the state of the people here. Now, if you were working there, don't answer out, but think about it. How would you feel? So you're working hard. You know it's of God. You're doing His work, but you're getting attacked. From every side, actually. See in verse 7, it says, Sanballat, who was in the north, attacked them. Tobiah, who was in the east, attacked them. The Arabs of Saudi Arabia from the south attacked them, and the Ammonites. And then the men of Ashdod attacked as well. The men of Ashdod are in what's known today as Gaza, that strip on the coast there of the Mediterranean. So you've got people attacking Jerusalem from the north, the east, the west, and the south. How do you feel now? Because prior to this, you had a little bit of an escape out towards the Mediterranean Sea. Now you have no escape. You're completely boxed in. And yet you're still doing what God has asked you to do. Do you want to persevere, or do you want to give up? Do you think that He's a great and awesome God, or do you think He's forgotten you? These are the questions that are going to come into our heads, aren't they, throughout life? Because we're going to hit all sorts of problems. We're going to hear people saying things. We're going to see bad things happening. But Nehemiah's encouraging us here, persevere, persevere, persevere. Then the people pray. This is lovely. Verse 9, but we prayed, that's the corporate we, to our God, and posted a guard day and night. You see, the people realized, we're going to take the example of Nehemiah, we're going to pray as well. And they prayed to their God. In their prayers, they're able to offload what we talked about earlier, perhaps their frustrations, etc., offload that. But also they're showing faith in God, aren't they? They're not retaliating. They have the opportunity to try and retaliate, but they don't. They pray to God. That shows faith. So in your perseverance of whatever happens, we need to show faith to God, confess to Him, and do it here as they're doing it in unity together. See, when one person stands on their own alone and tries to fight, it's very, very difficult. And that's why God has given us fellowship. Brothers and sisters, all part of one big family. Remember we looked at that a few weeks ago in the book of Ephesians? One God, one Lord, one baptism, one Spirit. We're one. We're supposed to be one. And so here they're showing exactly that they are one. And they pray all together. Our prayer times here are amazing. If you're able to come on a Monday afternoon, I know lots of you are working or studying, but at 1 o'clock on a Monday afternoon, we have such a tremendous, intimate time of prayer with God. It's an incredible time. And also before the service, if you're free, please come and join us as well. We have a lovely time of prayer there as well. And I know many in here today are real prayer warriors throughout the whole week. And we need that. We need it all together so that we can go forward in strength as these people went forward. Just a couple more things to come up against. Discouragement, I've put here, is understandable. Let's look at 10 to 12, verses 10 to 12. Nehemiah 4 we're still in, if you still got it open. Here's what Nehemiah says. Meanwhile, The people in Judah, okay, so that's outside of the city of Jerusalem, okay? The people in Judah said, the strength of the laborers is giving out. And there is so much rubble that we cannot rebuild the wall. All our enemies said, before they know it or see it, we will be right there among them and we will kill them and put an end to their work. Then the Jews who lived near them came and told us 10 times over, wherever you turn, they will attack you. I don't know if you gleaned from those verses, but what I'm gleaning from it is despair, discouragement, disillusionment, and people potentially on the verge of giving up. When it says there about the people of Judah, the reason for that is that the workers were basically living in Jerusalem, okay? Even though the walls weren't constructed properly, they were still living in there and had a little bit of protection. But many of their families were living out in the countryside and the villages, and they were feeling the intimidation as well. But they had no protection at all. And so they're coming then into some of their family members who are working in the city and saying, you need to come back out and protect us because we're vulnerable out here on our own. You need to give up that work and come back out to the farm that we're living on. But that's what's happening there. And so peer pressure, if you like, was building so that the people were being discouraged from doing the work of God in order that they would protect their families, which is a really important thing. And so Nehemiah obviously hears that, but discouragement, I think, is very, very much understandable. 1 Kings 17 tells us about a certain prophet. Do you remember who it is? Elijah. Brilliant. Yes, absolutely. Elijah. And do you remember how Elijah, after he had been on Mount Carmel with the hundreds of prophets of Baal, the demonic being, then he was discouraged and he goes to a cave and he says, God, take me. I want to die. That's what he says. This is a reflection of this. He said, all that work that I've done, I'm exhausted and despairing and I'm discouraged. Just take me now. And the people are coming out with similar sorts of comments. God, we've done all this hard work. We've come thousands of miles from Persia back to Jerusalem. We've done all this work for you. But the threats, the intimidation, all the words that we're hearing constantly negatively against us are wearing us down. We're despairing. We're full of discouragement, is basically what they are saying there. But Nehemiah perseveres. Let's look at the last thing that I wanted to highlight, which is unity. We're going to look 13 to 18 of chapter 4, if you've still got it open. Here's what Nehemiah says. Therefore, I, that's Nehemiah, stationed some of the people behind the lowest points of the wall at the exposed places, posting them by families with their swords, spears, and bows. After I looked things over, I stood up and said to the nobles, the officials, the rest of the people, listen to what he says. Don't be afraid of them. Don't be afraid. Don't forget, they're completely surrounded. Nehemiah says, don't be afraid of them. Remember the Lord. Remember the Lord. And listen to what he says. Who is great and awesome. And fight for your brothers, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your homes. When our enemies heard that we were aware of their plot and that God had frustrated it, we all returned to the wall, each to his own work. I'm just going to finish on that particular verse. Do you see what's happening here? Nehemiah has courage, discernment, and perseverance. But he also has faith in a God that he declares here is awesome. We sang this morning about a God who is awesome. accept our praises. God, you are awesome. There's none like you. Isn't that what we sing all the time? Do you believe it? When you're singing those songs, do you believe it? None like you, God. You can do all things. With you, all things are possible. Do you believe that when you sing it or when you read it in the scriptures? Because it's easy to just say, oh, yeah, I believe that. But do you actually? Because what I'm reading here is Nehemiah believed it with everything he had. Our God, the Lord, he says, don't be afraid. Remember the Lord who is great and awesome. Isn't that amazing what he says? So he's trying to encourage the people. That's what he's basically doing there. Encouraging the people. Our God is awesome. He will fight for us. So come on, let's go. Don't be discouraged. Don't be despairing. Let's go because he is great and awesome. And in doing that, he musters up enthusiasm amongst the people once again. Because at the very start, if we went back to the start, the people are building the walls with great enthusiasm. Yes, we're doing something for God. This is a ministry. Nehemiah's there. God's going to do. And then slowly, the threats, the words that were coming to them, the intimidation, etc., sucked them dry, if you like, of their emotions. They were weak. And God's, Nehemiah is saying here, there's somebody who's not weak. And we've prayed to him. Let's go. He's with us. He will deliver us. And so the people go with tremendous enthusiasm to do the rest of the work. I think all of that is just lovely. He's saying here really that although the circumstances have changed, the threats have got bigger, and we haven't got the work done, he says, but our God hasn't changed. He's the same God that brought the people out of Egypt and parted the Red Sea. He's the same God when they were intimidated about going into the promised land. You remember the spies came back and said, don't go in. There are huge giants in there. They'll kill us. And Joshua says, no, our God will take care of us. And they go in and they take over the land just as God had promised. But they were scared and intimidated. All these things keep repeating themselves in the scriptures. And they're for us to learn from. Even though these things will happen, persevere is the message I'm getting from Nehemiah here. I have had the privilege, as most of you know, of serving in quite a few different countries and met believers in lots of countries who suffer for the name of Jesus. They don't have the same freedom that we have here. Many of them living in fear, many of them living in hiding. They have to worship in hiding. They can't carry a Bible in case it's found on them. They can't pray in case they're arrested or attacked or killed. There are Christians killed every single day of the week in the world somewhere. Every single day, Christians. And it's not because they've broken the law. It's not because they have broken a speed limit or stolen something or killed someone. That's not the reason. It's because they put their hands up and said, yep, I'm a follower of Jesus. Because they've identified with him, the enemies have attacked them. But not just with threats, not just with words, but actually physically attacked them and on many occasions, sadly, taken their lives. But you know the interesting thing, if you go and speak to many of these believers in some of the countries that I've had the privilege of being in, very, very few times did I ever hear a complaint. The majority of them trusted in him. They expected that something was going to come along at some stage, but in the meantime, they served him. They spoke as freely as they were able to share the gospel of Jesus. They persevered. Book of Revelation talks about that a lot, about the saints who persevere to the end. And that's what we're getting here from Nehemiah. So probably none of us will suffer in the ways that any of those believers I've just mentioned are suffering currently or have done or will do. But the same thing is true for us, to persevere. So when people try to discourage you, persevere. When people try to throw despair onto you, shadow or a spirit of despair, persevere. Whenever you're discouraged, even yourself, because, I don't know, you don't think you're doing the right thing for God, or I don't know what other things you might be thinking, persevere. That's what we're reading here in Nehemiah. It's about perseverance. There's a quote just from one of the commentators that I was reading, Raymond Brown. I think this is really good. So perseverance, what he says about Nehemiah is this: his confident faith, resilient courage, his sacrificial work, and his consistent lifestyle turned a situation of potential breakdown into enduring testimony. In a nutshell, he's saying the life of Nehemiah is now there for us to learn from. And so that's what hopefully we're doing today, learning from Nehemiah. Do you know that the wall actually was built in the end, by the way? They talk about that as being a spoiler alert. If you read the rest of Nehemiah, you'll find that out. But he does build the wall. It's all God allows that to happen. Now, that's how we need to reflect, how we need to mirror him into society, is through our perseverance. And the perseverance can come with faith, and it can come with prayer, because that's what we've looked at there. Remember, the people prayed, Nehemiah prayed, but showed great courage as well. Those are all the things, part of perseverance, that we need to reflect into society. Because when the people and when Nehemiah persevered, all the enemies took note. They weren't having their eyes closed. They saw what was happening. They saw the people praying. They saw that the wall was being built. They saw that their God was overcoming all of their threats. And society will always look to us to see how we react. Do we react with prayer, or do we react with aggression? Do we sit and think about it? I didn't mention there to you, but part of the last point there was that Nehemiah assessed the whole situation before he got the people to go back to work. He looked, he saw their abilities, he saw the needs. He got families together so that they weren't missing each other, so that they were protecting each other, and they worked together at different parts of the wall. So, as always, you've got homework to do. Here's your homework. You need to recite this next time we meet, okay? And when you're remembering it during the week, I'd love you to remember Nehemiah, who persevered. But why did he persevere? Because he told the people, remember, the God who is great and awesome. Nehemiah chapter 4, we've read it there today. Don't be afraid of them. Remember the Lord, who is great and awesome. Can I ask you to stand and will you help me recite this? Let's say 3 times to try and get it into your head. And then the praise band are going to come up and lead us in one more song before we do this. So, after 3. 1, 2, 3. Sorry, my fault. 1, 2, 3. Don't be afraid of them. Remember the Lord, who is great and awesome. One more time. Don't be afraid of them. Remember the Lord, who is great and awesome. Final time. Don't be afraid of them. Remember the Lord, who is great and awesome. Amazing. Try and remember that. Going into the week, let it put into your head the thoughts of perseverance. And within that perseverance, faith and prayer as you remember Nehemiah. Come on ahead, Eamon, to lead us in that last song.
Just while Eamon is getting set up there, Valentino wants to say something about the women's ministry.
Good morning, my sisters and brothers. Good morning. I'm so sorry. Normally, I was supposed to be in the announcement this morning, but it was raining. I was too late.